Good morning, everybody. I didn't realise it was breakfast. How good's that? Well, this is table 4 and table 3. In terms of Julie getting her face done, you can see I haven't. Because at 62 years of age, it's a waste of time. If there's anyone here over 61, my apologies, keep on trying. But I've got better things to do with my life. Julie, it's wonderful that you're 21 today, or 21 this year, in terms of 21 years. We should all do a song, 21 today. That got me calculating, and I didn't even use a calculator because I'm old and I can actually do it by hand. I've been actually doing work stuff, for 45 years. I started off doing the milk run at Karua, and here I am now in front of a room of movers and shakers. How amazing is that for a little Aboriginal man from Karua, which is a very small town. Anyone know Karua? Small town. There we go. A small town that everyone used to stop at to go to the toilet on the way to Brisbane, but now you do the bypass. So that's where I come from. My mum grew up on a mission. So my mum grew up with walls around her and she couldn't leave the reserve without permission. And I grew up going down to the mission every day. So that's a little bit of my background. In terms of today, thanks to Linda and team for bringing me on board. I'm here to give you a different view of leadership. And when I give you this different view, that's not discarding all the wonderful stuff that Julia said, because I agree with all of it, because I've run big organisations, $80 million a year budget. And it's about bringing the two worlds together. But I want to give you a different view. So in terms of my Western world academic experience, I've got a diploma in surveying, so I used to be a surveyor. Then I got a diploma in drafting, and I was working in Sydney as a draftsman, and I met this girl at the Wentworth Hotel pub way back when, and on the 24th of December 1986, and she told her family the next day she was going to marry the man she met. Look at me getting all choked up. And you know what? She did. And we're still together. So what a wonderful place Sydney has been for me, but I love to visit and then get the hell out of here. You can have it. In my 30s, I completed a commerce degree. Ask me why, I'll say because I'm a bit crazy. I don't know, I didn't want to do commerce because I don't like commerce. But it gave me an understanding of the system. So I majored in accounting, minored in marketing, and I also majored in economics, and I've actually lectured in economics. And I've just finished a PhD. Why did I do that? Same reason as commerce, I've got no idea, but I'm bloody glad it's done. So I've got all that Western learning, but the most important learning that I've been given, I've been doing it for 25 years in terms of what Julie said, continuous learning. I've been going bush with elders. I started off going bush locally and going, wow, this knowledge is so beautiful, and now I actually connect with old people all over Australia and they continue to give me wisdom, and the old people say, if you come to me knowing nothing, I can give you everything. If you come to me knowing everything, I can give you nothing. So if you start every day going, I know very little, what can I learn? Every day is jam-packed full of learning and away you go. So I've had the privilege of learning all about my culture and being able to use that in my Western footsteps, and it's really changed my life in a positive way, and that's what I'm going to share with you now. So to start with, why is Aboriginal culture of any importance? Well, I want you to think about this. Imagine a world with no poverty. Imagine a world with no crime. Imagine a world with no violence, with no armies, with no wars, with no police, with no jails. Imagine a world where every child was grown up with nurture and transitioned into adult life very easily and lived to up to 90 to 100 years of age and had a life of contentment. Can you imagine a world like that? Would you like a world like that? Sounds pretty cool, hey? That was the Aboriginal world for 200,000 years. And people will go, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're one of them. You're trying to do a media push. You're trying to influence and communicate with us in a way that's not grounded in reality. We wouldn't do that, would we? We always send messages that are really positive and anchored in truth. But there is evidence. I haven't got time to tell you about it today, but that's the way Aboriginal Australia was. Other parts of the world haven't been. But Aboriginal Australia was like that because whilst in some parts of the Western world they built armies, we focused on building relationships. And Julie mentioned that. The most important thing you can do in anything you do is build relationships, because relationships enable us to share and to go forward in a very, very positive way. I've been told if I point that. This corner, thank you. There you go. So those of you up front, maybe up the back you can see it, but that's what's those things that when you were a kid you burn bugs with? Magnifying glass. You can tell I haven't held one for a while because they're nasty things. So a magnifying glass is how you unpack the granular, and that's really important. But when you unpack the granular, as Julie said, you need to be looking over the longer term. Why are we? I love the fact that you all focus on your change agents, your influencers. But what's really important is I can create change, but it might be change that affects people's lives in a negative way. So we need to affect positive change. So when you influence, you need to have a think about that, and I'm going to unpack that. But you do need to look at the long term, and I'll tell you a story to reinforce how you can actually change and you can influence, but if you only look short term, it could have really, really bad consequences. I get it now, there's a bit of a delay. A bit like me, really. So I've been around the old people a long time, so I'll be saying the old people a lot, because the old people is the collective of wisdom that's been here for 200,000 years from the world's oldest living culture. And so this is something we can all learn from. So the old people say when we leave this world behind, all we leave behind is our story. So make it the best story possible. The profound is often in the simple. So if you think about story, that's how Aboriginal people lived. And so the reason we had such wonderful lives for so long, for thousands of generations, is through the sharing of story and also our leadership through our elders and our governance. So education and governance was there, but in a different way to what you'll see in what you go and learn in an MBA. It's a different way of thinking, but the two can come together. And so story is really important. For 200,000 years, we sat around campfires and shared story. In 1788, when people came and saw us all sitting around all day, they went, "Oh, look at all those lazy blacks." That's where the term came from. So don't get offended by that. That's how we were described. But the bottom line in my country, Warramai country, we knew country. We knew where the food was. It was just walk through, not drive through. So we knew if you walked at certain times of the year, like at the moment, wattle's starting to blossom, so we know that tells us to go up to that mountain and there'll be fruit. So we did what you would call work for about 15 to 20 minutes a day. That's all we needed to pay the mortgage, keep electricity under control, keep everyone happy. So the rest of the time we sat down and shared story and nurtured and walked country and built relationships. That's why we had such a rich life. How good would that be if we didn't have to kind of work 12 hours a day just to get in front, yeah? So we shared story. So story is really, really important. And so this is a chance for you to think about what is your story? Because what our old people say is we're all born with a purpose. We're all born with a dreaming path. And the bigger dreaming path across all of Australia is I must care for my place and all things in my place. So from when I was a baby, I was taught that. But how I do that is different with everybody. So some of us are doctors, some are hospitality workers. How important is coffee in Sydney of a morning? Some of us are train drivers. Some of us are storytellers, some of us are communicators, media. In traditional times, we had all of that. But it was all with a purpose, long-term vision. I must always care for my place and all things in my place. So the question is, what is your story? And the reason I've got someone in grey there, I was with an elder many years ago in the little food court just outside Central Railway. And I said to him, "Mark, have you ever tried banh mi?" And he said, "Banh mi, what's that?" And I said, "Vietnamese pork rolls, they are the bomb." And so I bought a couple, $5.50, and we're sitting there and we're going, how good's life? And we're just buzzing, like two little black fellas in Sydney going, oh, this is the best place on the universe. And I looked around me and all I saw were great people. People hunched over, walking around going, my God, I have to go back up into that office block. I hate my life, but I've got to do it. I've got no choice. Too many people are living in grey. Not enough people are living in colour. Hence, my first book I wrote was called Iridescence, because we are born to live in colour. We are born to sparkle. We are born to shine. But when you get out here today, you have a look at all the people and you'll see greys walking around. Hardly anyone bubbling and shining, because they've lost their way. They've lost their story. They're not living their best story. Quite often we live a busy story. I noted what Julie said. Everyone's busy and stressed. And as a black fellow, I go, why? The word we use is wamba, which means silly fella. But if I run out of saying you're a wamba fella, I'll say, oh, you're a Narragar fella. That's the same. And if I get sick of that by the afternoon, I'll say, all you fellas are duppy. Same. Duppy, Narragar, wamba fellas. Why? Why are you all rushing around? And it's really sad in the workplace that anxiety and stress has become a norm, where we almost wear it as a badge of honour, where we compare ourselves to go, well, I'm not as stressed as that person, what's wrong with me? I've got to keep on going and being stressed until the holidays and then I can have a break. That's called the when then. That's not healthy for us. So you need to think about your story and get your story right, and your story needs to align with what you do in terms of your job, but it's not who you are. Your job doesn't define you. Your job gives you an opportunity to do great things. If you do great things, if you do kind things, if you do long-term things that create good, my screen just went off, then your story will be a good one. And that's what Aboriginal life is all about. And so this next slide is then how do you connect with other people's story? Because you've got clients, but you're out in your social life and all sorts of things. A couple of you I've seen the photographs. You were up here at Ivy nightclub last night, really kind of doing it hard. Whatever they do, whatever the word is for young people these days. Beyonceing. I'm with it, I'm hip. If my son was in the audience, he'd just cringe right now. Dad joke. So when you have someone sitting next to you, so you've got this book. That's your story. Written maybe by you, but mostly not by you. When you meet someone, their story's there too. But wow, there's your name in the next sentence. That's a wonderful privilege. Your name is in someone's story forever. The question is, what's the next sentence? What's the next paragraph going to read with your name? Is it going to be something great? Or is it going to be something beige? Or is it going to be something regrettable? That's called responsibility. When you're in someone's story, you now have been, without you even knowing it, suddenly you have a responsibility to their story. So you need to think about that in terms of what you do. Gee, I hardly have to touch this and it goes forward. How good's this? And so part of that is sitting on your roll with MFA, Media Federation Australia, collectively and individually in terms of your firms and also individually as people. How do you connect with other people's story? I've already given you the tip. From an Aboriginal perspective, I'm here to care for my place and all things in my place. So I really do want to connect with people's story, but in a productive, positive, long-term way. I'm just going to check the time. Yeah, I'm going good. Look at that. I'm going to steal this, Linda. So again, to reinforce, people go, oh, story, bar humbug. I'm sick of hearing about story, but stories are important. And what's so important about stories is they are happy ever after. They are happy ever after. So they are about the long term. So all the stuff you're doing, it is about the long term, and you need to be thinking about that. If you don't, then you're doing yourself an injustice and you really can't predict where that story will go. So there needs to be an anchorage point. Having said that, I do a lot of wellbeing stuff, and I've got a new book out on wellbeing. It's important to have a broad destination, but don't tighten it down too much. Have your goals very broad so that gives you room for flexibility. So that way you can focus on the journey as well. So as Julie said, you need to focus on both. But the journey needs to be going somewhere. And hopefully it's somewhere good in terms of your story and connecting with others. So Western leadership versus Aboriginal leadership, this is generic in an overview, but I really want you to have a think about this because I just finished a PhD, so I'm into referencing. I couldn't help it. I needed to look up the best. So I looked up Harvard Business Review because I needed the chance to say I've done a PhD so you can all look at me and go, wow, he's one of those nerds. So the Western definition of leadership is the accomplishment of a goal through the direction of human assistance. Does that make you feel excited? Does that make you bounce out of bed every morning, all you influencers and communicators? Not really, hey. But that's the definition of leadership from a Western perspective, one of them by Harvard. You could pay like, I don't know, $300 million and go and study at Harvard, and that's what they'll teach you. I don't know if that's going to really add to your story much, that definition. The Aboriginal definition of leadership, it's about my responsibilities to care for my place and all things in my place, for my children's 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 children. For 200,000 years, whenever our elders sat in a circle, and we always sat in a circle because circles never end, they never start, there's no power, we see each other, we trust each other, we're honest. Power of the circle. There's no hierarchy. A circle is equal, can't be broken. All those decisions were made for our children's 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 children. So I can take you to sites where old people have joined trees together and they knew those trees would take 200 years to become a story about unity, a story about respecting women. All those kinds of stories are from these trees joined together. They knew they wouldn't be around to tell those stories, but they did it because they wanted to prepare the way for 4 generations. That's what true leadership is. Global warming right now, it's here because we haven't been thinking about the long-term outcomes. What are we leaving for our children's 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 children? Well, we know what the data tells us, but what are we going to do to start turning that around so that our children's 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 children can look back and say, yep, they dropped the ball, but then they picked it up and they fixed it. Thank goodness they did. So that way we can be judged in a positive way. So Western leadership versus Aboriginal leadership. So one of those definitions I gave you, from my point of view, is short to medium term with a narrow focus, and one is multi-generational and broad in focus. So which one do I think is short to medium term with narrow focus? You're all going to be too scared to say anything other than the Western one. Western leadership, in my view, only in my view, only one opinion, is far too narrow. It's far too narrow, and the Aboriginal one is multi-generational, and it's broader. It's about my place, it's about everybody. It's broader than a PD. It's broader than KPIs. It's broader than goals. It's broader than my board's directives. It's broader than financial profitability. It's social. It's environmental, it's interactional. We need to think about that in terms of who we are as people on this earth. Yes, what we do is important, but even more important is what we leave behind. What is our legacy in that broader perspective? Yes, I made a lot of money, and I might have had a house with 5 Jilawars, that's our word for toilets, and our old fellas say, oh, these fellas, these white fellas, why do they need 5 Jilawars? They've only got 1 bum. They kind of shake their head at that one. So which achieves the best story possible? I really like this little cartoon with Family Guy, and they lived happily ever after for 7 months. You know, that's what we can get caught up in. I was a CEO in government for many years, and that's the kind of stuff I used to see. We all lived happily ever after until the next election cycle. And so we need to be long-term for the right reasons. Still going good for time, wow. So there are 2 stories I want to share with you because I've got time. It's wonderful. Thank you, Julie. Just marvellous. I could just dance with joy. So the first story is my story. So I grew up on Karua Mission. I was the first of my extended family to go to Year 12 at Roman Terrace High School. It was hard to stay in school. The pressure was to leave. I copped a lot of racism. Where I was called a dumb black coon and a dirty dumb black boong, all that kind of stuff. Very damaging. But also, because I loved study, I found some of my own mob, my own cousins, wanted to fight me. They called me Uptown. Uptown coon, They called me coconut, they called me a Lamington. These things still happen in communities. Part of what's happened in the last 200 years in terms of lateral violence. So times are tough, but I managed to get through, and I found myself when I was 34 years of age with that lovely woman I met at the Wendy. We got kicked out of the Menzies the same night for kissing too much on the sofa lounge and not buying drinks. If you ever meet Alison, you can say, come on. So we were married. At 34 years of age, we'd been married 4 years. We had 2 kids and 1 on the way. We had 2 cars. I had a house in country. I had a degree, 2 diplomas. So in any way that you measure success, I was a success story as a non-Aboriginal person, but also I was the prototype of what you'd like an Aboriginal person to be. But on the day of my 35th birthday, I was working at a uni in marketing, by the way, and I was lecturing in economics. On the day of my 35th birthday, I sat down and cried at the uni. And I went home and I laid in a bed and I curled into a fetal position for 3 months. And I cried. I knew depression was coming, and I'd seen psychologists and psychiatrists, but nothing got me out of this hole. And my wife would come to me and say, can I help you, darling? And I said, this is my journey. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's mine. I've got to own it, and I'll try and get my way out of it. When I reached out to the health system said, you're permanently disabled, you'll never work again. These panic attacks that are crippling, you might be able to learn to manage them. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't talk on the phone. I couldn't drive a car. Everything I thought about got me into a panic attack. I broke into a sweat. I couldn't do anything. I was crippled. And the system told me I would never recover. So I thought, okay, I've got a young wife. She doesn't deserve this jail sentence of an emotional cripple. My kids are going to get bullied because my dad heard all the guys I played rugby league with and cricket with for 15 years. They were all at the club laughing at me, saying I'm a loony. My kids don't deserve that. So I walked down the road to kill myself on this day. And I stood there and I was about to, and then this random thought, thank goodness, came to me. Whether it was intuitive self, whether it was an angel, whether it was God, I don't know. But the thought said, you don't have to believe the labels. You can turn this around and you can heal yourself and you can show the way for others. And so that's what I did. I walked back up the road. It wasn't easy. It took me years. And I sought to become the old me. That's all I wanted, to become the old me. But as I went bush, and I was given all these gifts from elders in terms of knowledge, I went way past the old me and I became the real me. And I learned that I'd spent my whole life chasing popularity. I was trying to be all things to all people at all times. And I couldn't do it anymore because I kept on getting judged and I kept on failing, because that's what happens when you depend upon externalities. So with the gifts of culture, plus I read lots of books on self-help, so I know all about the brain's physiology. I've read lots of other different books that are fantastic. I saw psychologists. I got little gems everywhere. I ended up getting a job in TAFE, and I didn't think I'd ever go anywhere in TAFE, and all I did was focus on my job as an Aboriginal manager. And I kept on getting promotions. I couldn't believe it. I kept on getting tapped on the shoulder. Will you be the head of access and equity? I went, oh. I'd say no in my mind, but my mouth betrayed me. And it would go, yeah, all right, I'll have a go. And then I got it, oh, will you be the Dean of Business and Computing? Oh, yeah, all right. Then I became the only Aboriginal person ever to be a CEO of TAFE. And in my third year, we were awarded the best TAFE in New South Wales and top 3 in Australia. And yet the first day in the job, I turned around 3 times and headed my car back home saying, no, I'm an imposter. I can't do this. But I ended up with all that success. But in 2013, I got headhunted to be the most senior Aboriginal public servant in New South Wales. Wow. I was announced in Parliament. I sat in Parliament. They all applauded me. But 12 months into the role, I realised I wasn't helping anybody. In fact, I was part of the problem. So I was leading pain. So I had to make a really tough decision, and I fell on my sword and I got myself sacked and started my own business. Because sometimes you just have to make hard decisions in terms of leading yourself. And once you lead yourself and walk your footsteps, then you can be a leader in what you choose. So now I run my own consultancy, And who would have thought in 10 years of running my own consultancy, that's going well, I've got a PhD, I've got 2 books out, I'm talking to you guys today, highlight of my life, no doubt. Don't be facetious, I mean that. Or maybe I was talking to some people and they gave me some critical messaging that would give me an elevator pitch to make sure that I hit the target market and you thought I was of value. Maybe, I don't know. Now that's my personal story about leadership. Kintore. You can see on the map there, Kintore is up on the border of Northern Territory and Western Australia. The country is desert, has been since the beginning. Hard, we wouldn't want to go in there, we'd die. But people have lived in Kintore, the Pinnabee people, for 200,000 years. Now they could have packed up, the harshest desert climate in the world, they could have packed up and just toddled west to the Kimberley coast and ate lobsters. Might have taken them 3 months, but they could have. Why didn't they do that? They didn't do that because country gave them everything they needed where they were, because they knew the story of country and they loved it. And their leaders said, here we are. We're here for the long haul. And so they did. But then along came government in the 60s. In the 60s, people in Kintore lived to 90. Government said, we must civilise you. So this is leadership from government. We must civilise you. We're going to build these little half tanks on the ground. We're going to put in a principal's residence and your kids are going to be educated. And that's what they did. Now we know, Aboriginal people, if we stay in the one place, everything dies. You eat all the food, you burn all the firewood, you can't live. That's why we moved. Not because we were like, oh, nomadic, Lord of the Rings, we must go and, find Mordor. We moved because that's how we looked after the mother country. But once we stayed in the one place, everything was dead. So the government went, oh, okay, we need to give you food. Oh, we better build a shop. Oh, if there's a shop, you need money. If there's a shop, we need to build an all-purpose, all-weather road. So we've got to give you sit-down money. And what will be in the shop? I don't know, whatever they want to sell. So it'll be chips, and it'll be Coca-Cola, and it'll be lollies. So as a result, now Kintore has the sickest community in Australia. People are lucky to live to 40. That's what leadership can do in the long term if you don't think about positive change and what am I doing, what is the impact of this decision. So leadership is about making the right decisions and the right changes, not just change. You've got to think about that. And so Kintore is a perfect story of leadership. And so the lesson from my story and the Kintore story is lead for the right reasons. Before my breakdown, I was leading to be popular. Wrong reason. Now I lead to share, to grow, to care for my place. And so when I get trolled, when I get negative feedback, when I have a bad day, I'm okay with that because inside I'm strong because I know I'm walking my footsteps for the right reasons. And it's the same with agencies. If you're strong in what you're doing, if you have a long-term vision of what you're doing, then you can always have faith that when you have a bad day, a speed bump of a day, you can go, no, but I'm doing the right thing here. So we'll just keep on going because we know we're doing the right thing. And so with that video clip, I'm going to be a little bit critical. You do change things. I'll add a later to that in a positive way, my critical review, by the way. You do save lives. I can tell you now, with all the messaging you do, people like you are the influencers that can reshape Australia, create reconciliation, bring us together, and in doing that, you will save a lot of my people's lives. Because whenever there's stagnation, whenever things stay the same, my people are dying. I had to bury an aunt that was my second mother the other day, and I ran the service. I buried her 2 daughters the 2 years before. That's reality. You change that. Make no mistake, you save lives. And when you save lives, you affect infinity. That's a pretty cool thing, but it's a big responsibility. So this is the 4 hours of leadership to think about in terms of what you're doing. Always think about your responsibilities broader than your PD, broader than your reporting to your manager. Think about my responsibilities to my colleagues, to other agencies, to my communities, to my country, to my land, to people I haven't met over in France, in all those other places that are war-torn. How do we help each other with global warming? That's my responsibilities. It's not just about you and getting those 5 gilliwars. What's a gilliwar? Aha, you're listening. Congratulations. Second one is relationships. So not one-night stands. Funny, I'm in Ivy and we're talking about one-night stands. Takes me back to 1984. No, not at all. Not at all. I couldn't afford bloody Ivy, apparently, I've got a niece that works here. I might see if she's working today. Shout me a drink. So, if you think short-term, that's the equivalent of a one-night stand. Not on. You need long-term thinking. Always have respect in all that you do. Respect yourself. Respect those you're interacting with. Respect the responsibilities you've been given. Respect your community. Respect your clients. But the big one is respect yourself. If you go inside and find out who you are, that's the most important respect you can have. And that's the reason I see so many greys. People don't look within and find the respect within themselves. They're too busy chasing these other people's expectations. And really important to keep it real, not tokenism and hot air. So, I used to report to ministers. Some of you would do some of this work for government. No wonder we've got global warming. The hot air that comes from Parliament, and that's the reason why I got out. There was just too much hot air. I ran a department and 60% of my staff were there just feeding the propaganda machine, and I was the head of Aboriginal housing whilst our people were dying and housing wasn't doing what it was meant to do. Nearly two-thirds of my resource was focused on the machine. And I know that's all part of you sustaining your business. You've got to support all these things, but try and find some ethical kind of moral fibre in all that so that you maybe can influence the machine a little bit, because there's just too much propaganda getting out there. Now, tying those 4 R's together, these are all connected to the long term, but as Julie said, we also need to focus on the now. So we make it happen by what we do in the now. So the now is really important. So every day, really respect what you're doing and think about, what am I doing in terms of contributing to where I'm going? So a word of warning 1, almost finished, almost on time. So this is an observation, I could be wrong, but when I did my commerce degree, I was a good student and I studied all my different management theories. I know them all. I think they're all pretty useless, really, but it is what it is. So a word of warning, this whole thing about specialisation and hierarchy of command so we can all do individual things and become really good at it. I understand how that works because you can't have everybody doing everything, of course. But the chain of command is problematic, and you might not have it in your agencies, but some of the people that you do work for will be into this. They're dominant cultural organisations. They're driven by black and white thinking. They're driven by power. They're driven by Western values, they're driven by the clock, all those kinds of things. They're premised on power, and what happens when you have a chain of command premised on power is it isolates, because each layer is isolated, looking up going, I wonder who's going to shit on me today. Of course, you can't shit upwards. Our word for that, by the way, is gunna. If you ever hear a mob going, oh yeah, that's a load of gunna, you'll know what they're saying now. I've given you the insight. You can say, oh gee, I've been given a bit of a good oil there. So it isolates because the people below start to work in fear. I do a lot of strategic reviews in my consultancy work. And I see people at the coalface doing amazing stuff, particularly in the health system. Doing really good stuff, but they're breaking all the rules. Because dominant culture loves rules, it loves paper, it loves all that stuff, it loves words. So they're breaking the rules in order to meet their clients' needs, but they live in fear because above them are these people called middle managers. And middle managers are the blocker of innovation that I've seen in all of my research that I've been doing, because they're trying to feed the hierarchy in terms of meeting the KPIs by driving the workforce, and they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. So they're not bad people, they're just caught up in this bottleneck of trying to service two masters. And so they become problematic because this fear is all around them. And so the people below are driven by fear, and when you're driven by fear, fight or flight syndrome kicks in and you start to shut down, and so the brain's physiology is such that when you're in fear, you can't be creative, and so your passion starts to erode, you lose your creativity, and everyone here is in the business of creativity, so you really need to make sure that fear isn't there. By the way, the studies show if you walk, that unleashes the innovation, it unblocks your brain, so if you're finding that you're blocked, This is research in Germany about 3 years ago. So walking is a really good thing to get the brain unwired. So it cripples innovation and it undermines productivity and it fuels atrophy, this chain of command. So again, Aboriginal people in circles. We always like to sit in a circle and yarn, doesn't matter who we have. Come on, let's get in a circle and let's have a yarn. And you might have people with different responsibilities, different knowledge bases, but we all see each other as equal. So that's a word of warning 1. Now, word of warning 2, does anyone know who that photograph is? The most amazing philosopher, possibly in modern times since Socrates. I'm not sure, but that's my view. Because in the movie, he says, "Who am I?" We all need to say, "Who am I?" before we can lead. Who am I? So he's a genius. But a word of warning too, data. We live in a world of data. You guys are capturing data all the time. Everyone's capturing data, data, data. Aboriginal people are the most investigated people on earth. There's more data on us than anybody. That gets transferred into information. Information in 1900 used to double every 100 years. Information in 1945 used to double in 25 years. Now, today, it doubles every 12 hours. We've got more information now than ever, and it's doubling every 12 hours. The problem is, information is not knowledge. So there's a lot of rubbish out there, and you're getting a lot of it, and if you're not careful, you're going to be shoveling it back out. And an even bigger problem is we've got too much data, but I've got my own definition of wisdom. Wisdom is when knowledge is enacted in a positive way. And I don't see much wisdom anywhere. So even though we have more data and knowledge than ever, wisdom seems to have evaporated. And what I'd like to suggest to you as leaders, take a hold of wisdom and every day create wisdom circles and go, oh, what wisdom are we going to create today? Now, you don't have to kind of sit down like a Greek statue and go, let's be really, really deadly wise. Just do something really cool that's smart, that changes the world, that's all. And that's wisdom. Now, to do that, you need time to think, and you don't have it. You're all fighting the clock. You're all fighting the clock. Julie was saying you're all fighting the clock. So you need to think about that. How do we create time to think? Because leaders need time to think. I'm just going back. I'm not thanking you yet because you haven't given me an applause. Bugger that. So one last story in the 2 minutes I've got. This is a really great story. One of my elders, it's hard to believe, but he was young once. And he said he was with an old fella, so he would have been about 25, and there was an old man in his 60s, one of his old uncles, watching television. And there was a politician on the television with an Aboriginal man. And this old Aboriginal man watching the telly got really, really agitated, and he was yelling abuse at the television. And the young man said, "What are you doing, uncle? What are you getting wild with him? What are you getting wild with that white fella for?" And he said, "These politicians, boy, these politicians get me wild. They call themselves leaders, but they don't leave any tracks for others to follow. They're just ghosts, boy. They're just ghosts. No tracks for others to follow." And he looked at that boy and he said, "You're going to be a leader one day. Make sure you're not a ghost. Make sure you leave tracks for others to follow." And that old man, that young man now is an old man. He wrote my latest book with me, Uncle Paul Callaghan. And he's met with the Dalai Lama. He's met with leaders all over the world. But you'll never hear of him because he doesn't seek fame or fortune. So he's contributed to that book, and he listened to that old man, and he's leaving amazing tracks. And through him, hopefully I'm leaving some little tracks, and hopefully all of you are going to leave some tracks as well, because that's what good leaders do. So thank you, and have a great day. I look forward to the